Psychiatry for a Mad World. An extract from the book. Shame and Guilt. Hugh has reached a milestone in the therapy, which is why Dr. Zab is so jubilant, even though while Zab celebrates, Hugh feels pretty miserable. Zab is not an earth psychiatrist, of course, and his methods differ slightly from those of our terrestrial therapists. People who have read some of the earth literature on guilt may be surprised at Zab's enthusiasm, as guilt has certainly had quite a bad press in many of the self-help books which abound on our world. And it is true that there are many Homo sapiens who suffer badly from feelings of guilt, feelings which may plague their nights and wreck their lives. But Hugh's guilt is good, so we need to clarify where Dr. Zab is coming from. It is common for psychology books and even accredited therapists to make the mistake of confusing guilt with shame, and there are vital differences which, if not understood by a client, can have devastating consequences. In 1971, Helen Block Lewis, a clinical psychologist at Yale University, presented a landmark book, Shame and Guilt in Neurosis, which differentiated shame and guilt and which is still influential today. Lewis identified that shame is an evaluation of the self, whereas guilt is an evaluation of the self in relation to a transgression, a deed which is done or not done which has adverse consequences for another. She found that shame was accompanied by feelings of being small and a sense of worthlessness and powerlessness. That certainly resonates with what we have identified previously about our ladder of social esteem. Shame is tied to feelings of being judged by another. In a later psychological study of 65 undergraduate students, research found that, quote, when feeling shame, participants were more likely to feel observed by others, and they were also more concerned with others' opinions of the self versus their own self-perception, end quote, which describes exactly what social esteem is. Shame is accompanied by a desire to escape, hide, or disappear. These hiding tactics are designed to hide the truth that the person in shame is somehow low down in other people's estimation. And concealing the truth is of course one symptom of psychopathy. Research into shame reveals those primeval feelings which drive us to compete on the ladder, trying all the time to appear high up and sexy in the eyes of others. Shame then, it seems, is that initial feeling we get when our esteem is slipping, and so shame is probably linked to genetic psychopathy. Little wonder then that researchers found shame to be a most painful emotion. Shame is found to have destructive effects on the individual and the individual's relationships. It differs from low self-esteem in that shame pertains to specific failures in the course of an individual's life, but frequent and repeated instances of shame are apt to chip away at a person's general level of self-esteem, so it is felt as a destructive force for the person in shame. The emotion of guilt was found by Lewis to be radically different. Guilt involves attention, remorse or regret over a misdeed, accompanied by a mental focus not on the self, as in shame, but on the deed itself. Guilt drives the guilty person not into hiding, but onto the more challenging path of righting the wrong. The ability of an individual to empathise with others is intimately linked to shame and guilt. The famed clinical psychologist and pioneer of the humanistic branch of psychotherapy, Carl Rogers, identified the urgency of empathy for close, mutually rewarding relationships, including the relationship between therapist and client. Tangney and Deering reviewed a vast array of other research which has found that empathy helps to facilitate altruistic helping behaviour, that it fosters warm, close, interpersonal relationships, and that it helps to inhibit interpersonal aggression. They found that, quote, empathy is the good moral affective capacity or experience, leading us in moral directions and diverting us from paths of vice and perdition, end quote. Their research discovered that guilt drove people towards other-oriented, empathic concern. In other words, it was a force for good. Conversely, they found that shame may hinder empathy. When we focus on ourselves, we cease to focus on others. This is a vital observation for relationships. In short, guilt fosters good empathic relationships, whereas shame is more likely to damage or dissolve a relationship.